Hey folks, Dr. Mike Israetel here for Renaissance Periodization. Today's video is how to reverse diet after a fat loss phase. And of course, we're going to talk about some common mistakes that people make doing this and how to avoid them. So we get three things to talk about generally. First of all, what is a reverse diet? A lot of contradictions out there about what that is. What is the correct way to do one? And what are the reverse diet typical follies and fallacies people fall into and how to avoid them? So without further ado, what is a reverse diet? Okay. A reverse diet is how you eat after a longer-ish, usually 8 or more weeks, of a fat loss diet. After that fat loss diet is over, the next part is the reverse diet, so to speak. This is done as a specific diet instead of just going back to eating the way you were eating before you did the cut. Or just no change and continue on your cutting macros, which generally people don't do, but sometimes they think they should, or no diet at all, and you just eat kind of, whatever you want, which has predictably not so great results, right? At Renaissance Periodization, our preferred nomenclature for this is the maintenance phase, because the result should be a maintenance, roughly, of your tissue size and approximate maintenance of your body weight. Not as mystical, not as cool sounding as reverse diet, but the old YouTube clickbait, we called it reverse dieting. A lot of people Googling that. Next, what are we actually trying to achieve with this reverse diet? What are we doing if we're doing reverse diet? We want to do a couple things. First is we want to prevent rapid regain of fat after a diet, after a fat loss diet. We are primed for fat regain in many, many ways: hunger, cravings, lower expenditure, and a bunch of other ways in which your body and mind are ready to gain all that fat back. From an evolutionary perspective, fat loss isn't all that great. Your body really just primed to gain fat instead of lose fat. There's not really much of a weight gain industry. There's an enormous weight loss industry for good reason. So a lot of what we're trying to do is making sure your body doesn't just follow its natural course, and after you've lost a bunch of fat, we don't want you to go back up like this. Ostensibly, you've lost some fat. In most cases, most people will want to stay at their new leaner physique, and a reverse diet really, really helps to do just that. In addition, this dieting phase can drop a lot of diet fatigue so that potentially we can do another diet at a low fatigue state at some point after. So for example, 12 weeks of fat loss, you met your goal, but you really ideally want to be another 10 pounds leaner. Diet fatigue is really high. You do a reverse diet for 8 weeks, your diet fatigue drops down a ton so that it's not sort of exponentially high. And then you can do another maybe 8 weeks of fat loss dieting after, drop that last 10 pounds, and voila, success. So a good reverse diet can set you up for another diet if you choose to do it, right? If, however, you choose to maintain, potentially for the long term, right after a fat loss diet, this reverse diet process has a sort of algorithmic way in which it works that lets you find out how much food is now your new long-term maintenance intake. Because it's going to be a little bit different than the prediction equations say, a little bit different than what you've eaten before, because now you're a different weight, different composition. And by adding and subtracting to lose or gain more, we can find out what your new maintenance is. And then once you know that, even if you don't want to stay there, so you want to do a mass gaining phase, well, now that you know your true maintenance, you know how much to add. Or if you want to do another fat loss phase, you know how much to subtract because there's no mystery. It's kind of a phase which reveals stability in a certain sense. Lastly, question is, when do you need a reverse diet? And it's usually after a diet or fat loss phase that gives you plenty of diet fatigue. Hunger, cravings, lower energy, less of a tendency to move, just like, I don't want to diet anymore. I just want to eat the kitchen sink. That means you probably need one of these in order to not regain a ton of fat and get all crazy. If you finished a diet and you just don't have any symptoms at all of any of these things, then you just eat normally and healthy, and that's totally cool, right? So if you, let's say you're 300 pounds, and you did a fat loss phase that took you to 275, and you legitimately still look at food and go, I don't know, like I could eat whatever. I'm not super hungry or cravey or any more than I was ever. Then you don't need any kind of reverse diet. You can just go and eat healthy and keep training, and probably everything will take care of itself. So this is really kind of, there has to be an illness for the cure to be applied sort of situation. All right. Knowing all that, how does the correct way to reverse diet actually work? We need two components at least. First, you have to know what your macros were and your calories at the end of your fat loss diet you just finished, which means you have to be tracking, hopefully at least in the last 2 weeks, so that you really know on average what you're taking in. If you don't know what you're taking in, there's not a very easy way to tell you what you should be taking in, short of a complete trial and error approach, which tends to cause trial and error style results, random, right? So make sure at least in the last 2 weeks of your fat loss diet, you really have a handle on your daily macros and calories. If you know the macros, you know the calories, and then you have sort of jump off point. Secondly, you want to have an estimate of your maintenance calories and macros at your new weight, okay? How do you do this? Well, you can use online equations. You can go on the internet and say, okay, how many calories to maintain 200 pounds? Let's say you went from 220 to 200. It'll give you a number. Or you can use your old maintenance. Let's say at 220, you were eating 2,000 calories. Now you weigh 200, so you take 200 divided by 220, and you multiply that by your maintenance calories at 220, and it'll roughly give you a decent guess as to what your maintenance calories should eventually be at your new weight of 200 pounds. So we have the calories that you just finished with, and then we have calories that are estimating roughly what your maintenance should be at that new weight. Okay, so we have calories you just finished with, fat loss phase, rough maintenance calories, those should be higher, otherwise you have a thermodynamic mystery. And what you do is you choose to start that first week of your diet, of your reverse diet, somewhere right close to the middle. Okay, so if your calories end of fat loss were 2,000 calories and the calculator on the internet says at this whatever body weight you're at, you should be at 2,500 calories to maintain, 2,250 is right about where you're going to set your week 1 reverse diet calories. Why? Because your maintenance calories almost by definition are going to be higher than your fat loss last week calories. They're gonna. So if you were physically losing 1 to 2 pounds a week or something on 2,000 calories, there's no way 2,000 calories is your maintenance. Because if you stay at it, yeah, you won't lose 1 to 2 pounds. It'll sort of dive off, but you'll get to 185 in 6 months before you ever stop losing if you start at 200, right? Now, why isn't it just the estimate that we had from an online calculator or whatever you were maintaining at before multiplied by the fraction of your weight now? Well, there are metabolic adaptations and behavioral adaptations. Your metabolism slows just a little bit when you're dieting for a long time, especially if you have diet fatigue. And more importantly, your NEAT, non-exercise activity thermogenesis, the amount of movement you do, how many steps you take a day, so on and so forth, tends to decline in some people pretty precipitously and in direct relationship to how diet fatigued you are. So if you're really hungry, really crave, a lot of times your energy energy output during the day falls. So it's not likely that right after a really tough diet, you're actually going to be at whatever calories that the equations say you are because you're so metabolically adapted, and thus your true maintenance is going to be lower. But notice it's not going to be 2,000 calories or whatever it is at the end of your fat loss because that would just result in more loss. It's going to be somewhere between the two. Our best guess is right in the middle, but we actually have no idea where it is between those two. In the middle gives us our best guess, but it's not the ideal thing, so we need more of a process after that. But point D there is begin eating at that halfway point. So in this example, 2,250 calories per day for the whole first week or two, and then see what happens. What do you do after that? You eat like that and you track your weight, your hunger, and your training responses. Notice, you might be a little bit hungry, maybe pretty hungry at first and still a bit tired because you're still carrying that diet fatigue. It doesn't go away right away. Say, well, I've been eating at what I think is maintenance for 5 days now and I'm still starving to death. Well, yeah, it's going to take a little bit of time to adjust. Keep on with keeping on. Don't go off plan. The first week, the first 2 are the hardest for sure. It will get better. Now, based on what's happening with your body weight specifically, after the first week, because the first week is a wash, because body water is going to crush everything. You're going to gain back a bunch of body water, so on and so forth. After week 1 and week 2 and 3 and 4, you are going to make modifications every week or 2 based on your body weight specifically. So if you're still losing weight, let's say you got to 200 and then after week 2, you're now at 198. Not good. We want maintenance, not continued fat loss. So you're going to bump your calories by about 15%. If you're stable, check this out, bump your calories by 10%. What? But if you're stable, shouldn't you be having stable calories? Not really, because your metabolism is firing back up. Your exercise expenditure, or just your general life expenditure for movement is going to be going up slowly. As your metabolism revitalizes, we want to feed it to make sure we get close to the maintenance it's actually going to be at in a week or two. If you just stay stable, next week, as your metabolism fires up a bit, you're probably going to fall again. We don't want it to wait to fall. We want to proactively catch it a little bit ahead. This actually works really, really well. You'd be like, wait, what? I'm going to bump up my calories by 10%. I'm just going to gain a ton of weight. That usually doesn't happen. And if you do the proactive 10% bump when you're at maintenance, it actually heals your metabolic adaptations or degrades them much faster. And that's kind of the whole point. You don't want to be all over dieted for too long. It's a giant pain in the ass. So if you're a little bit more proactive, it happens more quickly. Now, if you're gaining, so if for 1 or 2 weeks straight, you gain a significant amount of weight that reflects itself on the scale, let's say instead of 200, you're 202 or 203, then that last 10% bump, you just take it away. You go 1 or 2 weeks, and if the weight is stable, you put it back in. And if you gain again, you take it back out. Usually that doesn't happen. Usually you put it back in and your weight fluctuates and then it goes back down, sometimes even lower. You go another 15% or another 10%. And then after about 4 weeks or so, generally speaking, sometimes it can take longer, 6 to 8, your weight will start to really, really stabilize. And it's going to be with about the same calorie intake. So maybe after 6 weeks, you get to a point where you add 10% and it starts going up, you take it away and it starts being stable. Add 10%, it starts going up, take it away, it starts being stable. And all of a sudden you're like, oh, I actually think I'm pretty close to my maintenance. And this should correspond in almost every case with no more crazy hunger, no crazy cravings, and plenty of energy for training and for life, clear-headed and all that really good stuff. More or less about 48 weeks later, in many cases, not all, you're going to be in a really good spot and the reverse diet is pretty much over. And then you now are at your maintenance diet because you basically sort of pinballed your way into finding out what that number actually was for you. And it can be a surprise. It can be, oh, sad face, fewer calories than you had hoped. Or it can be real happy face, way more calories. And oh my God, I'm eating this much and I'm not I'm not gaining any weight. This is crazy. And pleasant surprise if you like food, that is. There are many, many, many effective variations of this scheme. So you don't have to do this exact thing as long as you leave the deficit pretty quickly, right away, get your best guess at maintenance, and then slowly raise and adjust calories. There are many specific methods that work, right? What about if you don't do that? Well, we'll talk about that in the follies in just a little bit. So, to the follies, to the mistakes. What are the problems? We have 5 of them for you, though I'm sure there are way more than that. First, point A. I should have numbered these 1 through 5. Damn it. Assuming exact maintenance. A lot of folks will send messages or questions or comments and say, hey, my maintenance is 2,500, but I'm gaining weight. Okay. Somewhere Albert Einstein is rolling in his grave because he knows that if you're gaining weight, you're almost certainly not at maintenance. You are at a surplus, conservation of mass energy. So a lot of times people will just assume the number they got on the internet or their old number is exactly what maintenance should be, and they're baffled. The thing is, those numbers don't account for changes in energy expenditure, NEAT, and they don't account for errors in application or individual variation or about 50 other variables. So don't assume your exact maintenance, and then when the body weight doesn't respond like you think, be completely baffled. You have to be adjusting on the fly. Otherwise, you might get really lucky and this will work, but you probably won't, and you'll just be baffled for no reason. Next mistake is trying to stay in a deficit. We're not trying, but staying in a deficit anyway, right? By analogy, this is like you're right next to a forest fire, and instead of being right on the forest fire, you roll your body weight until you're just a few inches away. So while you're not getting burned physically like to a black crisp, you're like getting marshmallowed and getting nice and puffy, and some animal will come around and be like, holy shit, cooked meat, like an hour later when you've been dead for 59 minutes. So if you are next to a forest fire, the best thing to do is to plot your course way the hell out of it. And the question is, if you see that you are next to a forest fire, when should you start walking away from it? The answer is right away. Right away. I'm no forest fire expert. Forest fire experts in the comments, please feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. Smokey the Bear, I've seen a few of his infomercials. They always get him confused with McGruff the crime dog. They're both, anthropomorphized animals that tell you ostensibly good things to do. Although McGruff the crime dog, good God, I ignore half that motherfucker shit every day. We out here committing crime, baby. Sorry to get get violent on you guys. In any case, forest fire, you don't want to stay close to it. Deficit, you don't want to be like, oh, I was in a 500 calorie deficit. This week, I'm only 400 calorie deficit. That means all of your diet adaptations for the negative, hunger, craving, etc., they're either the same or even getting worse. They're just getting worse less fast. That is not the answer. As soon as you're done with your fat loss diet, your best guess at maintenance is immediately where you go. So the best analogy there with a forest fire is plotting your hike out of the wilderness and start fucking walking uphill away from the fire, not like just move away a few inches and be like, oh, I think I can comfortably watch the forest fire from this distance. Don't do that. Don't do that. Bad idea. Next is freaking out about body water. It usually takes about a week for your body water to stabilize remotely. So if in the first week, first day or two, you start eating relatively normally and you gain 5 pounds, don't worry. You didn't actually gain 5 pounds of tissue. That's almost impossible to do in one day. So don't worry about it. The first week is a wash. Just eat as well as you can. See what happens after the first week. Then your scale weight becomes much more reliable. Fourth mistake is not keeping the diet mostly clean, or in other words, eating a whole bunch of junk food in that first several weeks. Now, here's the deal. It's tempting. You want to do it. It's going to make you feel oh so good in the short term. I mean, for the love of God, you guys ever walk through the potato chip aisle at the end of a diet? And so, a reporter comes up to you and says, hey, what would you do if you just had carte blanche and your metabolism worked on a turn dial and you could just eat whatever you want? You're like, I would open up all the bags of chips, pour them into a bathtub, and just swim around and eat the chips. It'd be great. And a lot of folks, when they finish a diet, without the bathtub, they more or less do that anyway. Why is that a bad thing? A lot of times it bumps up body water a ton, making you, first of all, miserable, and second of all, even more confused about what your actual tissue is doing. If you can make the macros work and you don't start eating this tasty food and go way over your macros, you can do it. But a lot of people, when they start eating junk food, they just want more and more and more in the first couple of weeks after a diet. And then they just end up at a surplus, big surplus, usually of fats, and then they gain a lot of body fat back. And that's kind of the opposite of what we're trying to do. So my recommendation is try to stick to mostly whole foods, healthy stuff, clean stuff, not a ton of really palatable junk food. And then if you find that you can throw in a bit of junk and you're totally cool and it doesn't bother you and you can still measure everything, totally go for it. But if you're one of those people that you have you plan to have a burrito, but you have 3.5 and you look at yourself in the mirror and you're like, what have I become? Well, just don't do that. You'll have plenty of time to do that weeks later when the reverse dieting phase is over. Right? So you don't have to eat junk right away. Lastly, reverse dieting at an unsustainable body fat percentage. Okay? After a bodybuilding show, you are not at a percent of fat that is sustainable or remotely optimal to sustain. Please remember that the optimal mass gaining percentage is usually north of 10% for most males, for example, and north of 18% for most females. And if you've done a bodybuilding show and you've gotten very lean, you may be closer to 5%. So are you supposed to reverse diet out of 5% and then weeks later you're at maintenance at 5 or 6%? No, good God. If you maintain at 5 or 6%, say goodbye to every single boner you've ever had. I'm just kidding. I hope you can't go in time and erase your old boners. That sounds like a really shitty version of the last Avengers movie. In any case, your sex drive is going to be crap. You're going to be super hungry and craving. You're going to have crap energy. It's just going to suck, but you're going to be super lean, but you already did your show, and you need to get out of that lean environment to promote muscle growth and recovery and everything else. So what you want to do after a show is mass gain. Once and for all, to answer this question, what do you do after a bodybuilding show? Mass gain for at least 4 to 6 weeks to get your body fat up to around that 8 to 10% region at least. And if you're female, geez, north of 15 to 17% at least. Good news, you might gain some decent muscle or at least potentiate some muscle gain later down the road. Second of all, it's baller fucking training because you're smashing a ton of mass gaining food. You get like crazy pumps, insane vascularity. It's really, really fun. And you're still super lean. So you get to show off, if to no one else, but yourself in the mirror or in your own Instagram photos. Because you have no followers, you just scroll through your own feed and you really like your own stuff. And I do that all the time. So massing out of a show is absolutely a solution. A few weeks or, maybe 6 weeks down the road, you're not 5% anymore. You're more like 9%, still feeling great, but now feeling even better, still looking lean. And now you can do a maintenance phase, maybe even active rest, maybe even a mini cut after the active rest to sort of get back, maybe you were 11%, get back to 9 or 10, and then voila, you can set up another long mass phase after that. So after a show, no reverse dieting, Reverse dieting is only done after you finished a regular fat loss phase and when you're not in that body fat percentage range, which is unsustainable. Because a good reverse diet will, if you get to, let's say, 12%, a good reverse diet will keep you at about 12%. If you get to 5%, there's no keeping at 5% unless you have multiple photo shoots back and forth. And then you would do a reverse diet, and mostly you'd be eating your own misery. Folks, thank you for hopefully learning. Hopefully I've been teaching. See you next time.